want you to turn to Matthew chapter 12, please. Matthew chapter 12. We're going to begin reading at verse 9 and read down through verse 14. Matthew chapter 12, verse 9 through 14. Hope your week has gone well. We've had an interesting week. I could hardly wait to get here tonight. I needed to be here with you and to know something of the movement of the Spirit of God in my own life. Matthew chapter 12, verse 9. And frankly, I'll be glad when we get out of this section. Very much. It's an interesting passage. My. Matthew chapter 12. In chapter 12, of course, you got two stories going on. You got the first one, which is the grain field thing, where they're picking grain on the Sabbath day. The disciples and, of course, the Pharisees are upset and are saying, well, look, what are your disciples are not lawful. They're doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. Then you move into this second scene, and so he's giving two stories right back to back, saying basically the same thing. The circumstances are a bit different, and in this second story, it goes like this. Now, when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue. And behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. Then he said to them, what man is there among you who has one sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Woo! I put that last part in there. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him. Let's pray together. Jesus, I want your mind. I am so twisted in my thinking, my culture and my upbringing and even my church surroundings, and has just twisted my thinking. My own sin and I can't blame it on anybody else, God. Please, would you rescue me tonight into purity of thought and into the revelation of your heart and your mind, that I might think exactly like you think and want exactly what you want and have your perspective. Move upon us tonight, we pray thee. In the name of Jesus, I ask it. Amen. This whole section is about rest. And of course, every time I mention the rest, the idea of rest, I feel good inside, because which one of us doesn't want rest when it comes down to it? And of course, I immediately think about taking a nap or whatever, but rest is the whole subject of the passage that we're dealing with from chapter 11 all the way into chapter 12. And there seems to be, given to us in the passage itself, this phenomenal contrast between the various viewpoints, well, maybe just two, but the various individuals who are viewing rest and who are labeling it, thinking about it in their own terms. For instance, as you start out in chapter 11, verse 20, you have the three cities. Now, the three cities are being rebuked by Jesus. He's done most of his mighty works in those three cities, according to verse 20. So he spent a lot of time ministering to them. They have a concept of rest, you understand. He's done these miracles there, and the rest that they think of is in terms of, serve me. I'll rest, you serve me. I'll relax, you do for me. Hey, you cook, I'll eat. You feed the 5,000, I'll devour it. See, the rest that they think about is, you solve my problems. You get me out of my mess. You help me when I need it. See, they think of rest in terms of themselves and what they can get. Jesus strongly rebukes the cities because he knows at the heart of that kind of idea of rest is a con. And what they're really doing is manipulating him to get what they want, and they have no allegiance to him at all. And they aren't grasping the whole idea of what it means to give your life and to be a flow of the divine Spirit of God through you. So he rebukes them. Rest. They don't have the right concept. As you move on in the passage, you'll note verse 25 that he moves into this group that we're calling the wise and the prudent. And it's interesting that verse 25 and 26 really highlight that group. In fact, Jesus, looking at the three cities and rebuking them and knowing that he's done most of his mighty works there and they haven't bought in, he realizes that that has been somewhat of a waste. In other words, he hasn't gotten done. He didn't form the evangelistic base that he thought he would out of those three cities. And so he breaks into a praise session, which is interesting, because when things aren't going well, he begins to praise. And in verse 25, he breaks into this praise session and says, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and the prudent. Now, who are the wise and the prudent? Oh, that's easy. They're the smart boys. Hey, they got it down. They know exactly what to do. Hey, they've got the education. They know how to pull it off. See, they are the people of the world who actually, they're the ones who have the brain power to get it done. They do. They know all the technology. They understand the how to manipulate. They got the pattern down. They're the smart boys. See, they got the plan. They know exactly what they're going to do in terms of rest. Oh, it's easy. See, by the time they get 40, they're going to be millionaires and then do what they want to. They view rest in terms of, just having everything they want, getting everything that they need, fulfilling everything that they desire. That's their concept of rest. It's the wise and the prudent. Interesting, Jesus says that, Father, you've hidden these things. That's the things of value. That's the spiritual things. That's the things of that really matter. That's the things of love. That's the things that make your life meaningful. You've hidden these things from the smart boys. They don't get it. And you've revealed them to babes. By the way, babes isn't your girlfriend. It's people who can't even talk. Babes. Babes who are totally dependent, who can't do anything on their own. And all of this valuable stuff has literally been revealed to people who are helpless and open and seeking and, okay. And the wise and the prudent have missed the rest. Then you come to verse 28, which we spent a lot of time on, verse 28 through 30, which is Jesus' invitation to rest. What's his concept of rest? His whole concept of rest is, and it's interesting that as you read the passage in verse 28, right at the end it says, I will give you rest, but the word give is not there. So it really literally reads in the original language, I will rest you. In other words, there's something about, he doesn't give you rest and you go away and have it. There's something about rest that is contained within his person itself, which is phenomenal, folks. Oh, what a biblical truth that is. That rest is contained within him. And he talks about it in terms of a yoke, which I think is really significant because it's all about linkage. It's all about being linked with him. In other words, rest is not found in, as the three cities wanted, solve my problems, get me out of this mess. Hey, eliminate that, get that taken care of. Hey, pay that bill, feed me, give me this, hey, serve me, and let me rest. See, rest isn't found in that style. And rest certainly isn't found in the smart boys who retire at 40 and have everything they want and can just mess around for the rest of their lives. That isn't the kind of concept of rest. Rest is found in not elimination of your problem, but somehow the additional resource in the middle of your problem that takes you through in victory. It's the yoke thing again. It's the bar, that the big heavy beam that goes across this way, and then the harness that's here, and of course a beam down here, and a cart or whatever back there, and an oxen is in here, and an oxen is in here, and they're pulling together. Hey, yeah, and you're here. There's no question about that. And this thing is heavy. Life has beaten you to death. Of course, you've never experienced that, but some of us have. Life has just stepped on us. Didn't get the breaks, didn't happen the way I want to do it. Things totally out of my control. Good plans didn't come together. How do you explain it all? Life is tough. I'm pulling. Oh, it's heavy. Rest is not the elimination of that. Rest is what? Oh, he links with me. Oh. And in the addition of his strength and the wonder of his power and might, do you understand what begins to take place in my life experience? It literally elevates me. Whew. Who wouldn't want that? You don't have to do it alone. The rest is not found then in the elimination of the problem. The rest is not found in the solving of the problem. The rest is found in him and the wonder of his person now doing through you what you can't do. Link with me, he says. Come on, link with me. Would you link with me? Why wouldn't you? And let me rest you. Jesus concept. 3 cities missed it. Smart boys missed it. Then he comes to this section we're dealing with, which is the Pharisees, the law of the Pharisees. Now, they have a concept of rest as well. And he gives these 2 stories, and it's really interesting to me, and I have no idea what you want to do with this, but see, the 3 cities and that concept of rest, he gives, 5 verses to that. The smart boys, he only gives 2 verses. And this thing about the law kind of rest, he gives 14 verses. So if you say, well, I'm tired of hearing about this law thing, I'm sorry. What can I say? He gave 14 verses to it. Like this is maybe a bigger problem than even the 3-city thing and that concept of rest. It may be a bigger problem than even the smart boys. This idea of religion and law and the concept of rest that they have. Oh, he really goes after that. Now, he does it in 2 stories. And, of course, the concept of rest that comes from the law is the elimination of work, ceasing to do. See, their whole concept was that on the Sabbath day, shut down. Woo, rest. Okay. So it's the ceasing of activity. And Jesus never proposed that. Interesting. So he gives these 2 stories. Now, again, the first story is the grain field thing, and on the Sabbath day. And while they're walking through, they just pick the grain, and hey, they rub it together, and the chaff thing, and blowing it away, and the reaping and the harvesting, and hey, about 4 times they should be stoned to death for doing that. So they broke the Sabbath day law over 4 times. And the Pharisees are all bent out of shape in verse 2. Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. And obviously, Jesus moves into 3 different types of discourses on that and nails them. And, of course, you would think when it was all over, they'd go away and that'd be the end of that. But they follow him now to this story that we're dealing with, which is the synagogue in which we read to you. And out of this story comes a statement by the Pharisees. It's found in verse 10. And then it really is a question. And then there is a duplicate or a answer to that question given in verse 12 by Jesus. And I want to parallel those for you tonight. In verse 10, you read this. They said, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Question mark. Is it lawful? Get the language. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Then Jesus answers them finally after this little discourse in verse 12. Therefore, it is lawful, same wordage, to do good on the Sabbath. Is it lawful? It is lawful. Now here's the interesting thing. He uses their identical exact word. Greek word is the same. It is lawful in verse 10. It is lawful, same identical Greek word. It has the idea of lawful. It has the idea of right. Has the idea of permitted. You can. You may. It's within the boundaries. It's that kind of idea. So Jesus is expressing their language, which becomes important in the passage itself. Now, I want to deal with the Pharisee view of this, and I want to give you 2 ideas, and I want you to work with me on this. This is awesome. Number 1, the reasoning of the law. See, these boys are smart. Come on. These boys are smart. And the law, the reasoning of the law has to do with limits. Well, you got to have limits. Come on, if you didn't have the law and set up limits, who knows what people would do? You got to set up the boundaries. And the law is for that purpose, setting up boundaries. So you literally have rules, you have laws that set up boundaries to keep people within the limits that they should live. Otherwise, they'll run wild. Well, you would. So your parents came along, taught you boundaries. And every time you swore, they washed your mouth out with soap. So you wouldn't do that anymore. And that was the law and the boundary. You keep your language within this boundary. That was the law. And the penalty was, if you didn't do that, you got your mouth washed out with soap. You look at me like you don't know what I'm talking about. That never happened to you? Yeah, that's the boundary, you see. Eat a bar of soap. You may have gotten so you liked it. I don't know. But whatever. So the purpose, the reasoning, the thought process of the law is this boundary idea, setting up the limits. Now, I really got intrigued with the idea of the Sermon on the Mount. Because if you go to the Sermon on the Mount, you will find out that in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said things like this. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That's the law. Sets up limits. See, you knock my eye out, there is a limit to what I can do to you. See, my preference would be I'd take a shotgun and blow your stinking head off. That would be my preference. But the law says, no, you can't do that. You are limited to knocking his eye out. See, he knocks your eye out, you poke his eye out. That's the limit. You can't go beyond that boundary. The law sets up the boundary. But see, I really would prefer not only blowing your stinking head off, but killing your wife and kids too, and going after your mom and dad, and also getting your grandparents. But the law says you cannot do that. The law says, you've heard it said by them of old. The law says, no, the limits are, you are limited to one eye for one eye. They knock a tooth out, you knock a tooth out. You're limited to that. The boundaries. See, that's the reasoning of the law. Now, Jesus also went on to say the rest of the statement, which is, you have heard it said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist persons. Not to resist an evil person. That doesn't set well, does it? The reason that doesn't set well with me is because it doesn't give me limits. See, I have to have limits, because my immediate question on that issue is, if I'm not to resist an evil person, well, how much am I not to resist them? See, what's the limit? In other words, they're nasty to me one time. Okay, I put up with that, but do I have to do it another time? And another time? And another time? And it's just going to go on forever and ever and ever? And when can I kick their teeth out? See, I want boundaries. I got to have limits to this thing. There has to be. So my immediate question on the whole deal of the Sermon on the Mount is, well, what does this mean? I tell you not to resist an evil person, and I want to know, what does this mean? How many times before I can smash them? How many times before I can get my revenge? How long do I have to put up with this? How long do I have to suffer under their nasty mouth? How long? What's the limits to this? Come on. That's law. And of course, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus doesn't answer that. Or maybe he does. No, I don't think he does. Well, he went on to say stuff like this, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. Now again, okay, wonderful Jesus, you're kind. Good for you. But see, the problem with that is, what's the limits on that? In other words, a guy hits me right here, and I understand I'm to turn the other cheek. Okay, have at it right here. And he hits me right here. Now what do I do? Surely you're not going to say, I got to turn, hit me again. And then, hit me again. Surely you're not going to say that. I mean, there's got to be a limit to this, right? I mean, turning the other cheek is good. I understand that. But there's got to be, you got to draw the line sometime. Sometime you have to look at the guy and say, don't hit me again, because I got a gun in your belly. I mean, come on. Isn't that logical, sensible? It's the limits of the law. You got to have limits. So the Sermon on the Mount, I don't have any problem with the Sermon on the Mount. Well, not much. But I don't have a lot of problem with the Sermon on the Mount, but there's got to be limits. For instance, Jesus said things like this. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. You're kidding me. I mean, sue me. Hey, you sue me, brother. I'm getting a lawyer, and I'll sue you back. By the time I get done with you, you'll wish you hadn't sued me. And we'll let the law determine what you're going to get out of me and what you are not going to get out of me. And the law will set the boundaries. See, we got to have boundaries, folks. The limits. And the law is, Jesus said stuff like this. Whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now again, that's like turning the other cheek. I understand that. Good for you, Jesus. Hey, Terry, the guy he's got groceries and he's got bags of groceries. Okay, I get that. And by law, I'm to carry his groceries 1 mile. And because I'm such a nice guy and a Christian too, I even go the 2nd mile carrying those packages. But bless God, what's the limits on that? How many miles do you go? I mean, 2 miles, another mile, another mile. Finally, when do you stop and drop his packages, smash his eggs, and step on his bread? I mean, come on. You know how people are, friend. They're leeches. They'll suck you dry, brother. And they'll command, if you'll go 1 mile because you have to, and another mile because you want to, they'll demand 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. They'll give you a list and you'll go to the grocery store and buy their groceries for them. And pay for them before you're done. So come on, you got to have limits. That's the law. The law is set up so, you only go 2 miles and then you drop the packages. That's the purpose of the law, isn't it? See, it's the reasoning of the law. Jesus said stuff like this. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. That applies to everything but money. Limits, you got to have. And I don't mind loaning people stuff that I don't need anyhow, or I'm not even using and probably won't use. I don't mind that. But come on. I don't mind giving my leftovers. What's the limits? What's the limits? Now, take that whole thought process, come right in here to verse 10, our passage. The Pharisees are looking right at Jesus and they've got this thing going. They want to accuse him. So what do? They look at him and said, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Now, they're asking a question that they already have an answer for, because their reasoning of the law has set up the boundaries for them. See, the boundaries is you cannot heal on the Sabbath unless the boundary is unless it is a life and death matter. Medical techniques cannot be done on the Sabbath day unless the guy's going to die. Now, a man with a withered hand, how long has he had a withered hand? Months, years. Was he born that way? Probably. The guy has had a withered hand for a long time. 1 more day won't matter. So wait. No medical techniques on the Sabbath day. That's the limit. That's the limit. That's the passage. That's the question. The reasoning of the law. You have that reasoning, don't you? Do you identify with that? I do. Is that the way you think? It's the way I think. Now, couple with that, not only the reasoning of the law, but number two, the reason for the law. See, and we've already stated this, but the reason for the law then is to place limits to things. People will go as far as you will let them go, so you put limits on this thing, and the law is the limiting factor, and without law, man, we're in trouble. Paul in Romans chapter 7 said, law is not bad, and it's good. The law is a good thing. Why? Because this very factor, it puts limits on. Hey, you do that with your children. Come on. Front yard, busy street. Don't go beyond the sidewalk. Law. Limits. Your wife gives you an allowance so you won't overspend. It's a hint that she might. Setting up limits. Limits. See, there's rest in the law because of the limits. See, I know how far I can go. I know how far I can get, how close I can get to the edge. I know when to back off. Limits. That's their idea. Now, I want to contrast that with you with the view of Jesus. This is awful. Jesus is so ridiculous. You aren't going to buy this. Who would buy this? The view of Jesus. His view of this whole thing is the love of the good. Did you see it in his answer? It is lawful, uses their language, verse 12. Therefore, it is lawful to do, and he adds this word, good. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Do good. The Greek word for good is really interesting because the Greek word for good, every time it's used in the New Testament, is always positive. Every single time, it's positive. Did you get it? Every single time it's used, it's positive. For instance, when it's used about speaking, that means that good is going to be praise. Good speaking is about praise, uplifting, glorifying, honoring. And good used in connection with speaking has to do with praise. It's interesting that in the scriptures, sickness, when it's good, when sickness and good come together, it's about being healed. You see, in the idea of doing, that good connected to the doing idea is about to benefit. So when you do good, you're benefiting someone. So every single time this word is used, it has to do with the positive. In connection with having something, good is in terms of prospering. It has to do with increasing. So good, every single time the word good is used, it's never in the negative. It's always in the positive. Now, isn't it interesting that the law, when it is used in the negative? Don't do that. You can't go beyond that. That's the limit. Stop right there. Hey! See, the law and its approach is always negative. Jesus is into good, which is always positive. Does that tell you something? See, the law says, how far can you go? Jesus says, good. Go all out. The law says, stop right there. Jesus says, kick over the traces. Go wild. I don't think you're catching this. Isn't that interesting? Very interesting. See, love is always positive. Love is always about burning in your bones and motivation and knows nothing about, oh, that's the limit. Love is about, I can't help myself. Love is about, I'm pouring my life out. Love is about, oh, I just care. Love is about, oh, I'm driven to do it. Love is about, not about sacrifice. See, law says, oh, if I go any further, it'll be a sacrifice. See, love doesn't know anything about sacrifice. Love only knows about, oh, pouring myself out, do good. See, it's positive. That's so interesting, isn't it? Let's go back to the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:44, Jesus said, you have heard it said by them of old, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Listen to this, I say to you, love your enemies. See, the law says, don't step on them. Jesus says, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good. There it is again. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. That's ridiculous, isn't it? See, I can live with the law that says these are the limits, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Don't go beyond that. See, I can feel some sense of justice in that. I can feel well, at least I knocked his tooth out too. See, at least he's in pain as well. Yeah, he stepped on my toe, but I smashed his other toe. So I can at least feel some kind of, But love, pull your life out. What do I get out of that? That doesn't meet any of my needs. This is ridiculous, isn't it? In our passage, man with a withered hand. Wait till tomorrow. Well, if you had the withered hand, would you want to wait till tomorrow? Well, but I don't have a withered hand. So I'm going to abide by the limits. But love says, pour your life out. Love says, I look at a man with a withered hand and I cannot stand it. I cannot stand it. I don't want him to be another day with that withered hand. I cannot know. I will not know. I just can't. I cannot tolerate that. Well, if your sheep was in the pit, you wouldn't go take a nap. You'd get him out. Love says, positive. Pour your life out. Now, if you're like, yeah, I am, you look at that whole thing and say, I can't. No. Can you live like that? I can't live like that. Am I going to do that? Not going to do that. Why? Because I'm constantly looking at people saying, how far am I going to let them push me? When am I going to cut this off? Law. So I cannot live that way, which is the last point that Jesus is making. And it's a phenomenal point. We're calling it lift of the divine. I can't live that way. I know. So Jesus, in our passage, look at verse 12 of chapter 12. He says, therefore it is lawful, oh, you're going to get it. It is lawful to do good, to do good, to do. You know what the word do there is? Oh, poieo. Now, if you haven't been around, you don't know what that means. See, there are two Greek words for do. There is praso and there's poieo. Poieo. Praso is obligation, duty, law approach. See, praso is the idea of drag your feet. Hey, do as little as you can. How much do I have to do and still get by? See, I want to be a Christian, but how little can I do? How often do you have to come to church? How much do I pray? How little can I pray and still be a Christian? I know you should be obedient, but how many times can I mess up and still be in relationship with Jesus? How much? See, that's law stuff. That's praso. Poieo is the tree bearing fruit stuff. It's nature within you that just whelms up within you. It's the fullness of the Spirit within you that just drives you. It's the thing that's just out of control. It's that which is in you that is the nature of Jesus. It's the actual filling of the person of Christ that comes to the depth of your heart and burns in your bones and literally takes you out of the mind process of the law and brings you into the flow of all that He is, which is good and positive. And pour your life out and give yourself away. And if you say, well, I can't do that, I know that's why it's got to be Him. In fact, back to the Sermon on the Mount. After Jesus got done giving this phenomenal statement about, I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who despitefully use you and persecute you. Then you know what He said? Listen to this. Listen to this. You know what He said? That you... Oh my. He says that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. That's DNA stuff. I'm a son of my Father in heaven, and this is the way He feels. I feel that same way. So there's within me this same identical flow of His life. Do you have that? Jesus. Your idea of rest is linkage, isn't it? That we would be so linked with you, that we would be so filled with you, that your life would indwell us, that we would be a product of you, that you would flow through us, so that your nature, your mind, your spirit, your attitude, who you are, would be who we are. All my life, Lord, I've been in the law. Limits. What can I get by with? How much do I have to do? What are the limits? You came along, you didn't know anything about that. You only knew about pour your life out, give yourself up. That's the heart of the Father. I want that. I want that. God, how am I going to come to the place where I look at what people are doing to me and say, how long do I, and no longer say, how long do I have to put up with that? When am I going to come to the place of the fullness of your Spirit where what they are doing to me breaks my heart because of what it's doing to them? Bring me into goodness. Poieoing goodness. The flow of your life. Is it possible tonight, oh God? Is it possible tonight, dear Jesus? Is it possible tonight for you to go to the depth of my heart my mind. And so give me your DNA, so fill me with yourself, so implant your nature, so infiltrate my mind and my inner being, so flow within me. That who you are, the way you feel, becomes how I am and how I feel. Link with me. Could I rest in you? Heads are bowed. You willing for him to change you? No one's asking you tonight to do this. What we're inviting you tonight is to experience this in him. No one's bawling you out for being the way you are. The law, the limit. How long do I have to put up with this? What we're inviting you to is the infilling, the intimacy, the oneness of his heart, the overwhelming presence of his divine being, the cleansing of his person. Would you dwell in his arms? Would you live in his grace? Would you take on his DNA? Would you let his nature flow to your heart? We could be different, you know. Altar's open. Oh, I want to kneel. Be obedient.